The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. What if our cherished virtues, patience, tolerance, humility, were not signs of moral elevation but symptoms of a deeper malady? This was Friedrich Nietzsche's most scandalous proposition, that the meek inherit nothing but chains of their own making. The illusion of goodness. Consider the office worker who endures daily humiliations from his supervisor. When asked why he doesn't speak up, he answers with pride, "I'm practicing patience, I'm being the bigger person." His friends admire his restraint, his seeming wisdom, but late at night, alone with his thoughts, resentment gnaws at him. His dreams fill with petty vengeances never enacted. His body manifests what his words deny: migraines, digestive issues, a persistent tightness in his chest. Is this truly virtue, or something altogether different? In 1887, Nietzsche published On the Genealogy of Morals, perhaps his most incendiary work. In it, he proposed that our modern moral framework didn't descend from heaven or emerge from pure reason. Rather, it arose from ancient power struggles between different types of people: the strong and the weak, the noble and the common, the healthy and the sick. What if a symptom of regression were inherent in the good, he wrote, likewise, a danger, a seduction, a poison, a narcotic, through which the present was possibly living at the expense of the future? The slave revolt in morality. Nietzsche's genealogical investigation unearthed what he believed was a momentous reversal in ethical thinking, what he dramatically termed the slave revolt in morality. This wasn't merely an academic observation, it was his diagnosis of Western civilization's deepest sickness. In ancient times, according to Nietzsche, the noble and powerful determined what was good, and what was good was simply what they were: strong, confident, vital, life-affirming. The bad was whatever they were not: weak, timid, sickly. Morality was an expression of power and flourishing life. But the slaves, the powerless, the oppressed, they had no means to overcome their masters physically, so they engineered an ingenious psychological reversal. They declared that what the powerful called good was actually evil. Aggression became cruelty, confidence became arrogance, strength became brutality, and conversely, what had been despised as bad was rebranded as the truly good. Weakness became meekness, submission became humility, impotence became forbearance. The slave revolt in morality begins when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. Nietzsche wrote, this French term, ressentiment, became central to his analysis. More than mere resentment, it describes a festering psychological complex, the powerless person's chronic suppressed hatred for those who possess what they lack, combined with an inability to express this hatred directly. Instead, this poisonous emotion must be sublimated, transformed, disguised, even from oneself. The result, a moral system that sanctifies weakness, while condemning strength, all while maintaining the pretense of spiritual superiority. The neuroscience of suppressed rage. Modern neuroscience has inadvertently provided evidence for aspects of Nietzsche's psychological insights. When humans suppress emotions, particularly negative ones like anger, envy, or resentment, the amygdala, our brain's emotional center, doesn't simply quiet down. Instead, research shows increased activity in this region, even as the conscious mind denies the feeling. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's neuroimaging studies at UCLA demonstrate that verbal suppression of negative emotions actually amplifies amygdala response. What we refuse to acknowledge doesn't disappear, it intensifies beneath the surface. Moreover, chronic suppression of authentic reactions correlates with diminished immune function, increased cortisol levels, and greater incidence of psychosomatic disorders. The body keeps the score of what the mind disavows. What's particularly fascinating is how this suppression can coexist with a narrative of moral superiority. The brain's reward pathways activate when we perceive ourselves as virtuous, creating a powerful incentive to reframe our helplessness as chosen goodness. We receive a dopamine reward for our virtue, even as our bodies bear the cost of our self-deception. Nietzsche, writing without the benefit of fMRI machines or contemporary endocrinology, nevertheless intuited this physiological dimension. Every mistake in every sense is the effect of degeneration of instinct, degeneration of will. To define it, almost everything that we call higher cultures is based on the spiritualization and intensification of cruelty. The priesthood of resentment. No one embodied this moral inversion more perfectly, in Nietzsche's view, than the priestly class. Unable to match the warrior nobility in physical prowess, priests cultivated a different kind of power, one rooted in the manipulation of guilt, sin and transcendental reward systems. It was the Jews who, with frightening consistency, dared to invert the aristocratic value equation: good, noble, powerful, beautiful, happy, beloved of God, and to hang on to this inversion with their teeth, the teeth of the most abysmal hatred, the hatred of impotence, namely the wretched alone are the good, the suffering, the needy, the sick, the ugly alone are pious, alone are blessed by God, and you, the powerful and noble, are for all eternity, the evil, the cruel, the lustful, the insatiable, the godless, you will also be for all eternity, the unblessed, the cursed, and the damned. These priests were masters of what Nietzsche called the grand style of revenge. Unable to act directly against their oppressors, they created a metaphysical framework in which submission became the highest virtue, and dominance the greatest sin. The afterlife would rectify all earthly power imbalances. The last shall be first, the meek shall inherit the earth. This spiritual judo move was, Nietzsche admitted, a work of psychological genius. It transformed the unbearable pain of powerlessness into a secret triumph. But at what cost? It negated life itself, turning against the body, against instinct, against the natural world, against everything that is. In the priest's moral alchemy, suffering ceased to be a problem to overcome and became instead a path to salvation. Pain was no longer an enemy, but a purifying fire. Weakness was no longer a limitation but a badge of divine favor. The subtle seduction of virtuous weakness. The real danger of slave morality, for Nietzsche, wasn't just that it constrained the strong. Its more insidious effect was how it poisoned the weak against themselves, against their own potential power, their own possibility for growth. Consider how often we hear phrases like "Sal Alan," "I'm too nice for my own good," "I care too much about others," "I'm just not the type to speak up," "I couldn't live with myself if I acted that way." These seemingly humble self-assessments often mask a deeper resignation. We define our character traits as fixed and immutable, especially those that keep us safely within our comfort zones. We call our fear consideration, our passivity patience, our resignation acceptance. Nietzsche saw this as humanity turning against its own vitality, to refrain from hurting, violence, exploitation, to place one's will on par with others. This can, in a certain rough sense, become good manners between individuals, if the conditions for it are present. As soon, however, as this principle is extended, and possibly even made the fundamental principle of society, it immediately proves to be what it really is: a will to the denial of life, a principle of disintegration and decay. What would it mean to look honestly at our so-called virtues, to ask which ones truly express our strength, and which merely rationalize our fear? Beyond good and evil, Nietzsche's critique was never meant as a simple reversal, a call to return to brute domination, or primitive nobility. His vision aimed beyond the dichotomy of master and slave moralities altogether. His ideal, the Übermensch, or Overman, represented the human being who could create values anew, free from both the arrogance of the masters and the resentment of the slaves. This future human would say yes to life in all its terrible beauty, without needing either to dominate others or to seek refuge in metaphysical consolations. The path toward this new human begins with radical honesty, what Nietzsche called intellectual conscience. We must learn to catch ourselves in the act of self-deception, to recognize when we're calling something virtue that might be closer to necessity or fear. Consider again our patient office worker. What if, instead of framing his inaction as virtue, he admitted, "I'm afraid of confrontation. I worry about losing my job. I don't yet know how to assert myself effectively." This honesty doesn't solve his problem, but it places him on solid ground. It brings him back into contact with reality, with his actual situation and capabilities. From there, he might begin the slow work of building genuine strength, not the brute domination of others, but the power to live according to his own values. The revaluation of all values. Nietzsche's project, which he called the revaluation of all values, wasn't about replacing good with evil, or virtue with vice. It was about questioning the very categories we've inherited, examining them for signs of life denial, for symptoms of what he called decadence, the turning of life against itself. In his extraordinary work, Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche offered a simple criterion: the value of life cannot be estimated, not by a living man, because he is a party to the dispute, indeed its object, and not by a dead one, first because he is dead, and second because he is its victim. If we cannot judge life from some objective standpoint outside of life itself, then any moral system that condemns the fundamental conditions of life, struggle, desire, growth, change, stands self-refuted. It is life itself passing judgment against life, which Nietzsche saw as the ultimate contradiction. Instead, he proposed a standard rooted in life's own tendency toward expansion. What is good? Everything that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power, power itself. What is bad? Everything that is born of weakness. This doesn't mean merely physical or social power, but rather the fundamental capacity to shape one's existence, to transform constraints into opportunities, to say yes to life even in its most painful aspects. The great health. For all his reputation as a destroyer, Nietzsche's ultimate aim was healing, what he called the great health. This wasn't the absence of suffering, but rather a capacity to incorporate suffering into a larger affirmation of life. In The Gay Science he wrote, "Great health, a health that one not only has, but also constantly acquires, and must acquire, because one gives it up again and again, and must give it up." This dynamic conception of health stands in stark contrast to the passive, static notion of well-being that characterizes much of modern thought. Health isn't a state to be preserved through avoidance of danger and difficulty. It's an ongoing achievement, a constant overcoming. The truly healthy human being, in Nietzsche's view, doesn't need to be protected from life's harshness. They have the strength to face reality as it is, including its tragic, terrible aspects, and still say yes to the whole. Toward a new nobility. What would a post-slave morality world look like? Not a return to barbarism, or simple dominance hierarchies, but the emergence of what Nietzsche called a new nobility, individuals who create values from the fullness of their being, rather than from lack, fear, or resentment. These new nobles would be characterized, not by birth or wealth, but by their capacity for self-overcoming, their intellectual integrity, and their ability to affirm life, even in its most painful aspects. I teach you the overman, Nietzsche wrote, and thus spoke Zarathustra. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? This overcoming isn't about conquering others, but conquering oneself, specifically, overcoming the internalized slave morality that keeps us small, resentful, and afraid of our own power. The new noble says, I will become who I am, not through blind assertion of will, but through a patient, disciplined integration of all aspects of the self, including those shadow elements we prefer to disown or project onto others. The eternal return. Perhaps Nietzsche's most profound challenge to slave morality comes in his doctrine of eternal recurrence, introduced in The Gay Science, through a thought experiment. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain, and every joy, and every thought and sigh, must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth, and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? This isn't a metaphysical doctrine about time being cyclical, it's an existential test. Can you affirm your life so completely, that you would choose to live it exactly as it is, with all its pain and disappointment, eternally? Slave morality fails this test utterly. It depends on the promise of eventual rectification, on the belief that current suffering will be redeemed by future reward. It says no to the present for the sake of a hypothetical future. The overman, by contrast, says yes to life as it is, not because it is perfect or painless, but because it is the only life there is. This total affirmation represents the ultimate overcoming of resentment. The dance on the abyss. Nietzsche knew that his philosophy balanced on a knife's edge. The death of God, the collapse of traditional moral frameworks, opened both tremendous danger and tremendous possibility. Without the crutch of absolute moral systems, humans faced a choice: sink into nihilism and despair, or rise to the challenge of creating meaning in a world without guarantees. This is the dance on the abyss that Nietzsche invites us to perform, to look unflinchingly into the void of cosmic indifference, and still affirm life, still create beauty, still pursue excellence, not because some god commands it, or some heaven awaits, but because this is what it means to be fully human. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things, he wrote in The Gay Science, then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful, amor fati, love of fate, let that be my love henceforth. This isn't resignation to fate, but active embrace of necessity, transforming what must be endured into what can be loved. The mirror of Nietzsche, to read Nietzsche honestly, is to stand before a mirror that shows us not as we wish to be, but as we are. Few have the stomach for this reflection. It's easier to misinterpret him, to caricature him, or to dismiss him as merely destructive, but his destruction always aimed at creation. His hammer was not only a weapon but, as he said, a tuning fork, used to test the hollowness of our idols, to find what rings true in you, which of your virtues express genuine strength, and which merely mask fear or impotence, which of your moral certainties could withstand the test of eternal recurrence. Would you choose them again and again for eternity? These are not comfortable questions, they weren't meant to be. They're diagnostic tools designed to reveal where life has turned against itself within us, where we've chosen comfort over growth, security over honesty, slavery over sovereignty. The inevitable misunderstanding: history has not been kind to Nietzsche. His sister Elizabeth, who controlled his literary estate after his mental collapse in 18, selectively edited and distorted his work to align with her own nationalist and anti-Semitic views, perspectives Nietzsche himself had explicitly condemned. Later, the Nazis would appropriate his concept of the will to power to justify their genocidal ambitions, another grotesque misreading that ignores Nietzsche's contempt for German nationalism, anti-Semitism, and state power. These distortions persist partly because Nietzsche's actual teaching is so difficult to bear. It's easier to transform him into a cartoon villain or an advocate for crude power politics than to wrestle with his actual challenge, the demand that we create values worthy of human potential, beyond both domination and resentment. As he predicted in Ecce Homo, some are born posthumously. I am such a one. I know my fate. One day my name will be associated with the memory of something tremendous, a crisis without equal on earth. I am not a man, I am dynamite. The invitation: Nietzsche's critique of slave morality, is not an endpoint, but a beginning. Having diagnosed the sickness, he invites us toward healing, not by prescribing specific values, which would contradict his entire philosophy, but by clearing the ground for authentic creation. The key question is not what is good, but rather who is capable of determining what is good. Nietzsche's answer: only those who have freed themselves from resentment, who can create from abundance rather than lack, who have overcome the need to diminish others in order to feel elevated. This standard is brutally demanding. Few of us could claim to meet it consistently, but perhaps that's precisely the point, to establish an ideal that calls us continuously toward greater honesty, greater courage, greater affirmation of life. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche offered a vision of what this might look like. The noble soul has reverence for itself, not arrogance, not self-aggrandizement, but genuine self-respect, the kind that makes it unnecessary to tear others down, or to seek validation through moral superiority. The whisper of the snake: Nietzsche knew that his ideas were dangerous. Live dangerously, he wrote. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. He wasn't being merely provocative. He believed that great growth requires great risk, the risk of error, the risk of misinterpretation, the risk of confronting realities that our comfortable moral fictions have kept at bay. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the title character encounters a young shepherd with a heavy black snake hanging from his mouth. Zarathustra exhorts him, bite its head off. When the shepherd finally does so, he is transformed, no longer shepherd, no longer human, a transformed, illuminated, laughing being. The snake represents all that is heavy, poisonous, and paralyzing in our inherited moral systems. To bite off its head is to decisively reject these life-denying values, to free oneself from their venomous grip. This is Nietzsche's invitation, not to immorality, but to the tremendously difficult task of creating values worthy of human potential. As he wrote in Daybreak, there are so many dawns that have not yet broken, beyond slave morality, beyond resentment, beyond good and evil, as we have conceived them. New possibilities await those with the courage to pursue them. Are you among them, or do you prefer the comfortable chains of virtuous weakness? The choice, as always, is yours.